Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and today, if you are one of those people who cannot stand an unresolved story, this episode is not going to be for you. We are looking at 4 mysterious deaths. Have no idea what happened. Well, we know what happened. They died. We just don't know why. And not a lot to, there's some theories that are widely accepted, but we don't really know for sure. So we're going to look at them today and see what's going on here. We're looking at the stories of Roland T, Owen, Elisa Lam, LeRoy Carter, and our first story of Alfred Loewenstein. Alfred Loewenstein was born on March 11th, 1877 in Brussels, Belgium, to a German Jewish banker. Alfred eventually used his family's wealth to then start his own banking enterprise and exponentially increased his own personal wealth, because that's what you do. When you already start with a massive amount of money, it's easy to then just exponentially grow it, because that's how compound interest works, or so it has been explained to me by a lot of people. During World War I, Loewenstein offered the Belgian government $50 million to help stabilize the country's currency in exchange for the right to print his own Belgian francs, but the country refused because that probably would have muddied the water between government and private enterprise. So it probably was a smart decision, even though it probably would have benefited both sides. So instead, Loewenstein partnered with Canadian Sir James Dunn on several business ventures and ended up making millions in profits. And millions in the 1920s is probably like billions today, maybe hundreds of millions for sure. Loewenstein then used that money to make even more money by installing power grids in developing countries. As one of the wealthiest men in the world at the time, Loewenstein then consulted with various world leaders and was made, quote, a companion of the most honorable order of the Bath by the British government, which is probably something prestigious. They got a bunch of dumb titles for everything over there. Well, on July 4th, 1928, Loewenstein departed Croydon Airport in Surrey, England, in his private plane with 6 other people to fly back to Brussels. And I mention this, I feel like I mention this all the time, but the fact that people just owned private planes in 1928, I know it was probably a little bit slightly more advanced, but I still just imagine that it's 7 people on this plane, right? It was, Loewenstein with 6 other people. I imagine, and plus there's a flight crew on board this. And I just imagine it's like this Wright brothers looking plane with the open cockpit and people got to put on the goggles. But no, this was an actual enclosed plane that people were flying in 1928. I guess I just don't know that much about the history of planes to know when actual commercial aircraft and private aircraft just became more mainstream like that. I don't know. It just blows my, I know that the Wright brothers, they figured it out. And then there were some open cockpit planes in World War I with the Red Barons and the big goggles and stuff. And then I just fast forward to the 40s and 50s when it was the start of jet engines and fighter jets and bigger commercial planes, right? And then I just don't know what happened in the 20s and 30s. So either way, it's beside the point. It's not important to the story. Either way, Loewenstein, his plane, he's flying across the English Channel at 4,000 feet when he got up and went to the back of the plane to use the bathroom. They have bathrooms on these planes in 1928. 100 years ago, you could take a poop in the sky. And that blows my mind that technology has been around for that long. And it still takes 45 minutes to board an airplane today. What are we doing as a society? The iPhone went from cell phone technology went from a flip phone to you can fold the screens now in a matter of 15 years. And in 100 years, we just got bathrooms on airplanes and not efficient boarding and deboarding. Anyway, I just, funny how humans prioritize different things. Anyway, Loewenstein, he's in the back of the plane using the bathroom, and a lot of time has passed since that was like more reasonable for someone to take a poo, right? Like, and look, here's the thing. Dudes take a long time to make their poos because it's our quiet time. And it's also like I think for a lot of dudes, it's that kind of like, that macho, but there's trauma going on, right? Cause like, something's touching her buttholes, man. And so we got to like recover from that. Cause we're not like women, maybe not in your butts, but women are used to things going in and out of them. Right? Not dudes. Society. No, we're putting in. We're not getting things put in. Right? And so dudes, we got to sit there on our phones and just hang out for a bit until we feel like, all right, we can get back out into the world. Well, like, and that's probably like 15, 20 minutes. Well, it's been way longer than that. And so the rest of the passengers on the plane, they start getting concerned. Loewenstein's secretary got up to go find him, and she gets to the back of the plane and she finds that the bathroom is empty. Meanwhile, the plane's door directly across from the bathroom was wide open and flapping in the wind. I don't know how people didn't hear this or feel the change in pressure. I mean, it was only 4,000 feet. It's not like it was 15, 20, 30,000 feet. So maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. But I feel like you would have heard the plane's door open and flapping in the wind, but they didn't, I guess. So everyone just kind of assumed that Loewenstein was a big dummy and had just opened the wrong door and just fallen out of the plane to his certain death in the icy waters below. So word gets to the pilots. The plane lands on the first flat patch of land it could find to go through, do a thorough search of the plane and the surrounding area before continuing to an airfield in Saint Inglevert, France. News of Loewenstein's disappearance then immediately caused a panic, resulting in the shares of his corporations dropping in value by more than 50%. On July 12th, the accidents branch of the British Air Ministry released a report of their findings, stating that while the plane was at an altitude of 1,000 feet, one of their men had thrown themselves against the same door that Loewenstein had allegedly fallen out of and found that the pressure from the air outside prevented him from just casually walking out of the plane. So basically, this idea that Loewenstein just kind of Mr. Magoo'd himself, just opened the door and just walked right out of the plane was physically impossible because the pressure from the wind blowing in would have like pushed him back. Or at least like caused enough friction that he would have realized like this is not the bathroom. So they throw this theory out and they concluded that there was no way that Loewenstein would have just accidentally fallen out. Either he did this on purpose or someone helped him. A week later, Loewenstein's body was found near the city of Boulogne on the northern coast of France and was taken to Calais. An autopsy revealed only a skull fracture and several broken bones, leading medical experts to believe that Loewenstein was alive when he hit the water and then obviously much less alive immediately after that, because he would have smacked the water and that's what broke all of his bones. Between the autopsy report and the British Air Ministry's investigation, news outlets began wildly speculating about what happened, because why would journalists just report on the truth when you can just create a bunch of rumors and speculate and spin it as truth? The New York Times noted that Loewenstein had grown increasingly absent-minded and that it wasn't completely out of the question for him to open the wrong door on his own plane and accidentally walk out, even though science had already kind of mostly disproven that theory. Others speculated that his vast business empire was on the verge of collapse, whether due to the entire operation being too big to manage, or that Loewenstein's allegedly corrupt business practices were about to be exposed, which would then lead him to commit suicide. No one really knows. So finally, in 1987, author William Norris wrote a book on the story, and he asserted that Loewenstein had been tossed out by the pilot, Donald Drew, under the direction of Madeline Loewenstein, who wanted to take sole control of the family fortune. This author claimed that the door had been completely removed in the middle of the night in order to toss Loewenstein out and then replaced with another door when they initially landed on the beach. All of that is just wild speculation. There was no evidence of anything like that happening, and none of that has ever been proven. Crime writers Robert and Carol Bridgestock later speculated that Loewenstein faked his own death. Their evidence pointed to the fact that Loewenstein was buried in an unmarked grave and that Madeline did not attend the funeral, even though they literally found his body, identified him and everything. But whatever. Let's not trust, that's what they want you to think, man. Writer Johann Hari also alleged that Loewenstein had made a deal with a mob boss named Arnold Rothstein to sell opiates to Europe, and the deal had gone sour. None of this has ever been proven, and no one still really knows what happened. Just a wildly wealthy man mysteriously died on his airplane. Our next story here happened on January 2nd, 1939, when a somewhat rotund, beefy gentleman with a cauliflower ear and a scar on the left side of his head checked into the President Hotel in Kansas City, Missouri under the name Roland T. Owen. He didn't have any luggage with him, but he asked for an interior room and was taken up to room 1046. A few hours later, Mary Soptic, the hotel housekeeper, walked in on Owen. He had all of the shades drawn. He looked very nervous, and for some reason, I guess this is just what they did. Like, the housekeeper, she just starts cleaning the room. And she's cleaning. While she's doing that, Owen leaves, but asks her to leave the door unlocked when she was done cleaning because he was expecting a friend to come over who didn't have a key, but he could let himself in. When Mary returned a few hours later with fresh towels, she saw that Owen had returned. He was lying on the bed, fully dressed, and there was a note lying on the desk. And the note read, "Don, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait." Which is, odd. The next morning, Mary entered the room and did her cleaning again while Owen sat in the dark having a private phone call with someone. This is just so weird. She then returned a few hours later with another round of fresh towels. And before she entered, she heard two men on the other side of the door who told her to go away when she knocked. So she leaves the towels in front of the door, goes off, keeps doing her work. Later that night, Robert Lane, an employee with the Kansas City Water Department, reported that he saw Roland Owen walking down the street and offered him a ride. He noticed that Owen had a deep gash on his arm and asked Robert if he could be dropped off somewhere so that he could then take a taxi. Lane obviously asked Roland what happened to his arm. Owen didn't really answer. He just replied, "I'll kill him tomorrow." So again, so many strange things happening in this story that people are piecing together kind of after the fact. A few hours later, after midnight, the hotel's operator noticed that the phone line in Owen's room had been off the hook for a couple of hours and sent the bellboy up to tell them, hey, check your phone line, hang up your phone. It might be off the hook a little bit. The bellboy knocked and then was told to come inside by a voice on the other side of the door, but the door was locked and the bellboy couldn't get in. The voice then said, "Turn on the lights." But again, the bellboy was like, "Hey, the door's locked. I can't get in." But the guy on the other side apparently didn't hear him or whatever. The bellboy continued to knock on the door, but he was ignored. And so frustrated, the bellboy told the person on the other side to just put the phone back on the hook. He storms off. The next morning, the phone was still off the hook, so a different bellboy went up to the room to try to get the issue resolved. He's knocking several times, but when he didn't receive a response, he had a master key, and he uses it to get in. He immediately found Owen lying in the bed, completely naked, and assuming that the guy was just drunk, the bellboy put the phone back on the hook and leaves the room. When the phone came off the hook again a few hours later, another bellboy came and checked on Roland Owen. And when he got inside the room, again, bellboy placed the phone back on the hook and he turned around and saw blood smeared all over the walls. It's pooling on the bed. It's all over the bathroom. He found Owen on his knees and elbows on the floor in the bathroom, covered in blood. The bellboy, he immediately runs downstairs and retrieves the manager. Manager calls police. They quickly come to the scene. They turn on all the lights, and they actually found Owen tied up around his neck, wrists, and ankles, and saw that he had been stabbed several times in the chest. Somehow he's still alive in all of this. So one of the detectives asks, like, who is in here with you? Nobody, replies Owen. How did you get hurt? I fell against the bathtub. And that doesn't explain why he's tied up. So it's like, did you try to commit suicide? He says no. At that point, Owen finally loses consciousness, and then he dies at the hospital the next day. Kansas City police, they're completely confused. There wasn't much evidence left in the room, and the only fingerprints they found belonged to Mary Coptic, the original housekeeper. Several people came forward and identified Owen's body, but they all knew him by a different name. A nearby hotel worker knew him as Eugene K. Scott because he had also stayed at that hotel. He had stayed at another hotel under the name Duncan Ogletree. And then a wrestling promoter said that he knew the man as Cecil Warner from Omaha. Additionally, no one had any idea who Don was from the note that he had left on the desk that Mary had found. And police had no real direction since they weren't actually sure if Roland T. Owen was this dude's actual name. To make this story even weirder, an anonymous donor called to cover Owen's funeral cost. And when the funeral director asked why, the man explained that Owen had abandoned a woman they both knew and that all three of them had met at the hotel to initially discuss this issue. Cheaters get what's coming to them, said the man before hanging up, which is even wilder. So I guess you can kind of start like maybe the guy known as Roland, he left this woman, and this woman had sought comfort in this other man, and they all met up to kind of like, why did you leave this woman? And then the man maybe attacked him, and that's why the gash was on his arm. And then maybe that man also came and tied him up and beat the hell out of him. We don't know. At the funeral, which was attended only by police detectives, a local florist provided the grave with an anonymous order of 13 roses with a note that read, "Love forever, Louise." A few weeks later, a typewritten letter arrived at the home of Ruby Ogletree in Birmingham, Alabama. This letter was from her son, Artemis, which was strange because Artemis was still a teenager and didn't know how to use a typewriter. Artemis had actually left home to travel the country, and his previous letters home had all been handwritten. Ruby Ogletree also noticed that the tone and language in the typewritten letter was different from the previous letter she had received from her son. Over the next several weeks, Ruby received more typewritten letters. One said that Artemis was attending the business school in Chicago. Another said he was on a ship sailing to Europe. Finally, in August, Ruby received a phone call from a man named Jordan claiming that Artemis had saved his life and that he had married a wealthy woman in Cairo. He also explained that Artemis could no longer send her letters because he had lost his thumb in a fight, which maybe, but you don't need thumbs to type. You kind of do need thumbs to write unless you like really work your index and middle finger to hold a pen, which I guess is doable. Or maybe your middle and ring fingers could do it. You know what? It's possible. It's possible. I don't buy this excuse. Ruby, she now thinks all of this is really weird. She gets police involved. They got in touch with the American consulate in Egypt, but no one had ever seen Artemis, no record of him, nothing. When Ruby found a May 1935 edition of the American Weekly highlighting the murder in room 1046 in Kansas City, she recognized Owen's body as belonging to her son, even though the murder happened long after she had received the letters and phone call from the guy named Jordan saying that Artemis was in Egypt. Ruby then sent additional photos to the Kansas City police, and investigators actually confirmed that Roland T. Owen's real identity was Artemis Ogletree. However, no one knows who Don and Louise were. No one knows why Artemis was using all of these fake names and checking into all these different hotels. And the case of his death was never actually closed. Our next story here of LeRoy Carter Jr., who was born on September 17th, 1951 in Louisiana. No one really seems to know anything about his early life other than that he spent time in Vietnam as a Marine. And then following the war, Carter settled in San Francisco and kind of struggled to readjust to civilian life, as a lot of Vietnam vets did. He started committing several petty crimes just to get by. And then on February 7th, 1981, Carter found a place to sleep by Alvord Lake in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, which seems pretty nice by homeless standards, I'm guessing, in San Francisco. So he settles in for the night. The next morning, San Francisco police were called out to the park after a tourist found a backpack splattered with blood. After searching for a few minutes, Officer James Doherty came across what was left of Carter. That's because his head had been, quote, expertly removed from the rest of his body, which lay in a pile of blood inside of his sleeping bag. Even more, where Carter's head was supposed to be were instead 2 corn kernels and a chicken wing, which were stuffed into the opening of his throat. Now, San Francisco police began investigating the murder and called Sandy Gallant, who had recently finished up investigating the Jonestown massacre. And thanks to Jim Jones, Gallant had become fascinated with cults and religious groups and had earned a reputation for solving crimes related to cults. Gallant quickly noted that the murder resembled a sacrificial ritual performed in Santeria, the thing that Sublime doesn't practice, which is a Caribbean religion that mixes elements of Catholicism and African Yoruba. So apparently the chicken wing and the corn kernel, I guess, was a sign of that. Gallant then recruited Charles Wheatley, one of the leading experts on Santeria in the United States at the time. Wheatley immediately pointed out that Carter's murder was done as a human sacrifice, which seems pretty obvious at this point, and that Carter's head was taken to be used in a stew. However, he noted that the ritual wasn't complete yet because after 21 days, the priest, also known as the murderer, would then return to the area with the head, I guess the cooked head, and wait another 21 days before discarding it with near the rest of the body, which is so dumb, right? Like, if you're going to murder someone for a Santeria ritual, you probably want to murder someone that's not in a heavily trafficked area where the police are going to come and take the body after a couple of days and not 42 days later. Like, you got to do it like out in the woods or the desert somewhere where nobody's going to find it. Anyway, it's just kind of stupid. Of course, no one believed Gallant and Wheatley's theories, and the rest of the San Francisco Police Department thought they were insane. However, they didn't have any other plausible theory and just kind of went with it. And so on March 22nd, exactly 42 days after the murder, Gallant and Wheatley went back to Golden Gate Park and found Carter's decomposing head. Now, the body had already been removed, but the murderer just put the head back there, the cooked head of LeRoy Carter back where he had been murdered. However, by then, all of the leads that San Francisco police had gone cold, and newer murders were taking priority over Carter's. And so to this day, no one knows who killed LeRoy Carter Jr. Our last story here is a little bit more of a popular one. There was a Netflix documentary dedicated to it. A ton of other podcasts have covered this story. But it's of Elisa Lam, who was a student at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. In 2013, she went on a solo vacation down to California. She visited the San Diego Zoo and then took a train up to Los Angeles. When she got there, she checked into the Cecil Hotel on January 28th near the city's infamous Skid Row, which is this section of the downtown area where one of the largest homeless populations in the United States exist. It is a scary place if you're white. And the Cecil Hotel is just like a super cheap hotel. Dirty. I think part of it is even like affordable housing at this point. Like right there on Skid Row. The Cecil, built in the 1920s, was already the site of a ton of awful things. The unsolved murder of the Pigeon Lady of Pershing Square happened there. I don't know what that story is off the top of my head, but again, it's an unsolved murder. Wonderful people like Johann Unterweger and Richard Ramirez, which we have covered on this show, lived there briefly while they were out killing and raping people. There have also been several suicides, including one where the person jumped from a window in the Cecil Hotel and landed on a pedestrian, killing them both. So Elisa Lam was initially booked into a shared room on the 5th floor, but her roommates quickly complained of her acting super strange. So Lam was moved into her own room. She was scheduled to leave the Cecil on January 31st and head up to Santa Cruz. However, when Lam's parents didn't hear from her, even though she had been calling them every day to update them on what she was doing, her parents got concerned and called the police and also flew down to Los Angeles to look for her. Police combed the hotel and used dogs, but the dogs couldn't pick up a scent. And then a week after Lam had last been seen, police began posting flyers around the neighborhood. Another week later, police released a surveillance video from the Cecil's elevator, which brought international attention to this case. It's the famous elevator footage that you may have already seen, where she goes into this elevator, she pushes a bunch of buttons, steps into the corner, and then the door doesn't close, which is weird and very unsettling. And so when it doesn't close, she pokes her head out into the hallway and then steps back into the corner. Still, the door doesn't close. So then she goes back out of the elevator, looks around, hops back in, looks around, steps back out. A few seconds later, she comes back into the elevator, pushes a bunch more buttons, starts pacing back and forth, rubbing her arms together, waving her hands to the side like all jazz hands, just jazz hands in the elevator. Starts rocking back and forth. Eventually, the door closes, and then the video ends. And that's the last time anybody saw any evidence of her. So, as the investigation dragged on, guests in the Cecil Hotel began complaining of low water pressure. Some even complained that their water was black and tasted funny, which is, why are you drinking black water? That's gross. On February 19th, police found Lam's naked body in one of the 1,000-gallon water tanks on the roof of the hotel. The coroner's office initially listed the cause of death as an accidental drowning, but noted that Lam's bipolar disorder was a significant factor in her death. There was no evidence of any physical trauma or suicide, and there wasn't enough blood available from her body at that point to do a full toxicology report. Although everyone knew how she died, she clearly died because she drowned. No one could figure out how she had gotten up into those tanks, because the doors and the stairs to the hotel's roof were always locked, and only hotel staff had access. Any attempt to forcibly enter the roof would have triggered an alarm, although I guess there was a fire escape on the side of the building that could allow access if you really wanted it. However, so assuming that she goes up the fire escape, fine, but the water tanks themselves were only 4 by 8 feet, making them very difficult to get into. Even though Elisa was pretty small, still would have been really difficult for her to get into. And someone would have needed to use a ladder to open the hatch at the top and climb in. There was no evidence of that there. No idea how she would have gotten in there. Lam's parents eventually filed a wrongful death suit, but the case was dismissed in 2015. No one knows what happened after the elevator video ended. No one knows how Lam got up inside the water tank. It's still a giant mystery. All right, mysterious deaths in the books. Sorry, there's no... I feel like some of them, there was a little bit of closure, but not really. Just a lot of speculation and conspiracies and all that kind of stuff. So let's recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, Alfred Loewenstein, basically the equivalent of if Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk just mysteriously died off of their airplane, their private jet. Apparently went to use the bathroom and then maybe just Mr. Magooed himself out of his own airplane and fell out. Or did someone help him and push him out to his death? We really don't know. Number 2, LeRoy Carter got straight up decapitated in a San Francisco park. People think it was a Santeria. cult ritual? No one knows. They do know that 42 days later, his head showed back up at the site he was murdered, as the cult experts predicted, but no one knows who that guy was. Number 3, Elisa Lam, one of the more famous disappearances in recent times. Go watch the Netflix documentary about it if you want to learn more. It goes over everything I covered already, but with a lot more wild speculation and conspiracy. Next week on Our Weird World, we are covering some prison escapes. We're looking at 3 stories from people who went to prison, but they didn't stay there. We're looking at stories of Radovan Krashier, the Briley brothers, and Pascal Payette. Fun stories that just show some of the ineptitude of people who can't really afford to be inept, but it's the justice system for you. Thank you all for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends about the show and keep it weird.